But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. I have a dream, said Martin Luther King Jr. on the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. First, I will discuss the circumstances that led to this great speech in history, and second, the impact that the speech had on the world. The circumstances that led to the speech and what was happening during the world at the time was it was struggling with passing of the Civil Rights Bill. It was also struggling with justice and fairness for African Americans. This speech was extremely necessary because African Americans were poorly mistreated at the time. Martin Luther King Jr., I believe, also thought it was necessary because racial equality was a must. No discrimination would bring us to a better place in which we are in today. He really truly wanted a better future for all of us, Asian, African American, Hispanic, Caucasian, whatever your race may be. He wanted peace for all. We have just discussed the circumstances that led to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. Now I will move on to discuss the impact that the speech had on the world. Those fortunate enough to listen or even watch Martin Luther King Jr. give his speech at the time were impacted very strongly because it was intended to lift the spirits of the participants and to give the March on Washington a tone of historical importance, according to Thomas Peake. I believe it did its job. To this day, it is still talked about in many classrooms and societies around the world. The impact that the speech continues to have on the world is very strong, and like I said, it is still talked about today around the world. It was also able to help pass the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 and the Voting Rights Bill of 1965. And as Raymond Frey said, because of the speech, no longer could the country ignore the injustices of poverty, segregation, and violence against African Americans. Today we have investigated, the circumstances that led to this great speech in history, and second, the impact that the speech had on the world. You should really take the time to read the speech, because he truly knew how to catch the person's attention. He realized that racial inequality was a must. Discrimination would not drive this world to a better place. He was truly inspirational. He wanted bigger and better things for yourself and for himself, for your family. I have a dream. Today, Martin Luther King Jr.